The site that we are located on was once part of the general depot for the Lighthouse service. So anything used by a lighthouse or a lighthouse keeper in America was made here, or things were brought here and inspected and then shipped out nationwide. So even if you were a West Coast lighthouse on the Great Lakes, on the Gulf of Mexico, if you needed something, it came through here, it was made here on Staten Island. My name is Celestina Quadrado, and I'm curator and site manager of the National Lighthouse Museum. I've been here since our grand opening in August of 2015. By 1939, it was sort of a complex of 18 buildings. Sadly, only 7 of those buildings remain today. The museum is located in one of those buildings. It's the 1912 Foundry building. The title of National was awarded to Staten Island in 1997. What happened was there was a group of lighthouse historians and sort of concerned individuals about the status of lighthouses in America and their preservation. And so they decided that there should be a central repository for all lighthouse information. And so they sort of put out an RFP or nationwide bid for towns and cities to compete for the title and to win the National Lighthouse Museum. And Staten Island submitted along with a whole bunch of other places. I think Maine and Michigan were the runners-up, and Staten Island was awarded the title. The reason why it was picked was because of the depot's history and the fact that we are such a short walk from the ferry. The museum is located in St. George, Staten Island. We're about a 5-minute walk from the ferry terminal. What I tell people what they want to do is, I wish we had a lighthouse on our site, so it'd be easier to find, but we don't. So I always tell people just to exit the lowest level of the ferry terminal and walk across the parking lot, and you can get to us that way. We're essentially right on the water. We're just a bit hidden, so we're behind Bay Street. And if you're driving, you can drive down Bay Street and stay to the right at the intersection to the ferry terminal and drive down the driveway for the ferry maintenance facility, and there's free parking right outside the museum. The museum is self-guided, so visitors usually can expect to be here from anywhere from typically a visitor would say about half an hour to an hour experience inside the museum. So they come, they get a brief orientation, but the museum is self-guided. So they can sort of take themselves around the museum and read all about the history and technology of the nation's lighthouses. Fresnel lenses were the lights at the top of the lighthouse. They used to use oil lamps before the invention of the Fresnel lens in 1822, and it gets its name from Augustin Fresnel, who was French, and he invented them in Paris then. I always tell people they're almost like magnifying glasses, so they both bend the light and magnify it out into a beam, and they capture about 80% of available light from a light source, which could have been an oil lamp or an electric light. So all Fresnel lenses were pretty much made in 2 countries, France and England. France because the inventor, Augustin Fresnel, was from there. And also the skill it took for the glasswork, since they are all individual prisms that are stacked within a metal frame. It was just very high skilled, and they had to be hand ground and polished. And they try to use crystal for clarity, but crystal is a leaded glass, so the lenses actually weighed more. First order lens, which is one of the largest lenses that they made, could weigh up to 4 tons to give you some sense of size. The ones that we have on display in the museum are equivalent to fifth order, which is the second smallest size they made. And from there they go up, to give you some sense. We just can't fit larger ones in the museum at this time, but it really shows you how beautiful they are. We offer sort of a diverse set of public programs. We offer seasonal lighthouse boat tours throughout the year, starting in May and running to October, about 1 to 2 per month. We usually try to offer about one maritime themed or lighthouse themed lecture a month on top of that. The museum is a nonprofit museum. Everyone thinks because we have national in the title that we're federally funded, but no, it's sort of just us. So we rely on public donations, memberships, grants, things like that to help get our funding and through the admission of our public programs and the museum itself. We're beginning thinking about expanding the museum into the building next door, into the 1907 lamp shop building. So that will be a big undertaking, but it sort of sticks to the vision of the original Lighthouse Museum, their idea back in 1997. And as soon as we opened the doors in August of 2015, we looked around and we said, we're out of room. We're essentially all out of room already. So I definitely welcome the space, and the more objects we can get and the better stories that we can tell next door. Okay, like any museum, when we opened in 2015, we needed money, and we had to fundraise. So we decided to fundraise and sort of sponsor out by Lighthouse model. It's one of our donor walls in the museum. So donors got to pick a lighthouse model of their choice. I think there are 12 countries and 28 states represented, but that might have changed by now. There's over 400 active lighthouses in the United States today, and I think there's about 168. We could be pushing near 180 lighthouse models in the Wall of Light. So they're historic. So some are of lighthouses that no longer stand, like the Colossus of Rhodes or Pharos of Alexandria, and even the Fort Tompkins lighthouse that used to exist on Staten Island. But most of them that are there represent lighthouses that still exist today. Even though we represent all the lighthouses across the country, regional lights are always the easiest and most interesting to talk about because everyone sees them and recognizes them and loves them. One of those just happens to be Robin's Reef, which is located about halfway between the Statue of Liberty and Staten Island. It's a little cast iron spark plug style lighthouse, and Kate Walker was the famous keeper of that light. Her husband was the keeper, and then he got sick and died, I think in 1890, and she became head keeper of that light after his passing. Apparently, because it was an offshore lighthouse, or lighthouses located in the water, they didn't want to make a woman a head keeper. Before this time, women were head keepers of onshore light stations, but the government sort of hesitated for women being offshore. But I think 2 or 3 men turned down her job. It was sort of isolating being out there, even though you think you're close to New York City. And Kate became the keeper of that light. Her son Jacob was her assistant. Eventually Jacob gets married and moves in with his family to the lighthouse. Kate's kids actually went to school on Staten Island, and she would often row to Staten Island for supplies. A lot of people think she rowed her kids to school, but I don't think that was an everyday occurrence. I think, they came home for holidays and vacations and things like that. But she seemed, from contemporary accounts that were written at the time, she seemed to like the isolation. The hustle and bustle of both New York City and Staten Island seemed to get to her. So it seemed like she was a perfect job for her. And she was credited with over 50 saves. So she was, and she was quite famous in her day.